project, Leading Managing Change in Higher Education, our second day of our meeting. A workshop in leadership and change management is planned for today, and kindly organized by the host of our second meeting in this Birmingham. As you know, the project focuses on building capacity at the senior management level in the partner countries, also at providing opportunities for peer learning in the fields of leadership and change management. And I cannot think of a better place and time to be. So we're having really the best time, the best place right now. Looking forward to the meeting. I'm going to give the floor to Paul. He's going to lead the session today, and I'd like to wish you a nice day and really productive work.
Morning, everyone. I hope you slept well and enjoyed your curries Sunday. Okay, just the domestics then. There are no fire alarms planned for today, so if the alarm does go off, the fire exits are here and here. And follow the green signs, and we must be in the car park where you came in. The toilets are through either one of these doors to the right, or indeed next door where you use the coffee. Turn right, and the lanes are down there. Have a good day. I'll hand over to Gary to do some introductions.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Wood. I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic Affairs at University College Birmingham. And on behalf of the university, I'd like to welcome you to Birmingham, to Austin Court. I believe that most of you, if not all of you, came into our Summer Road site yesterday for your meetings, so you've seen a little bit of what we do. I'm sure that today is going to be, and tomorrow for that matter, but today a very productive day. I've looked at, obviously, the schedule behind me. We've got a very full schedule of events to go through today, and I'm sure it'll be very interesting and productive. To start off with, Richard and I are going to do a little bit of a double act. Not quite Laurel and Hardy, hopefully, but a bit of a double act to talk through some of our experiences at UCB, give an understanding of the UK flavour. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity throughout the day to engage in some discussion with some question and answers going through. So, Richard, do you want to
just step through this
talk
quickly,
through
yes.
the agenda?
Fourth hello, there you go, why not? We should all do it, shouldn't we? Go around. My name is Richard Riley, I'm the Dean of the Business School at UCB, and again, welcome, and I'm sorry I missed you yesterday evening. It sounded like the curry was really good, so I thought I missed out on that bit, so never mind. Just to quickly run through this programme, I think you may have this in your packs and you may have a chance to look at it. We're really excited that we've got some really good speakers here today. Some of them are travelling by train here as we speak, so fingers crossed they'll be here soon. So, as I say, Gary and I will introduce you, give you a bit of context about UCB and the challenges we're facing in leadership and the challenges we're solving as leaders of a university in the UK. We've then got John Ryder, who will join us. John's currently the chairman of the Institute of Directors, West Midlands, but has a long history and a long background dealing with change management in the private sector and working with the public sector and solving some of those challenges in a regional context. We'll then have a break. Some coffee next door. Coffees, if you haven't found them already, are next door, and the toilets are just behind there if you need a break. We've then got, delighted to say, we've got Simon Whittemore, who's a senior national figure, who looks after an organisation called JISC, as one of the leading managers in JISC, which is a national body which provides the infrastructure and IT and information systems infrastructure for universities and FE colleges across the whole country. Okay. So he'll give us some stories from a national perspective. Then Dr. Leslie Huxley is joining us. Leslie is, again, a leading manager in the Leadership Foundation, and she'll tell us a lot more about that organisation. She's a very successful programme training leadership skills in universities for probably 10 years plus now. So lots of stories about the leadership challenge and the skills and ambitions leaders have in the UK for universities. We'll then break for lunch. Part of my job is to keep us on time, so we may be flexible. We'll introduce question and answer sessions. So after each speaker, if there are questions, please ask them, and we'll stop for 5-10 minutes to take some questions and answers. And this afternoon is going to be more flexible. This afternoon, the tables are round, So we want you to work on these round tables together. So we'll set you some challenges. Leslie will give us some examples of national programmes for you to consider. Sarah Digby, my colleague, and I will sort of facilitate some round table sessions where you can consider some of these challenges of the conference theme, which was students as co-creators. How do we engage our customers, our students, in co-creating our future, okay, in higher education? And how do you manage that from a leadership and change perspective? Okay. So we'll address some of that this afternoon, and that'll be fairly flexible and open. We'll use the full space. We'll have flip charts and paper and pens and so on, and solve some of the problems we set you this morning. Okay. Okay. So I'll pass back to Gary, who will use the gadgetry. Use this, Gary. No, just. Oh, you want the full screen, don't you? Why not?
Why not? The full screen. Okay, I'll try not to wander about too much, but I have a tendency to wander when I'm talking. I'll try and keep as still as I possibly can, but my apologies in advance if I do wander off. Given the event Leading and Managing Change in Higher Education, when I was approached to give a view from UCB at this event, I thought it would be useful to give a view from a practitioner, and I'll explain what type of practitioner I believe UCB is and what we are in a moment, to give the view of a practitioner of how things are changing in the UK and what impact those changes are having on us as an institution and how we lead and how we manage that change. So the purpose of this presentation, and I do hope it leads to some discussion afterwards, is really just to go through our experience. So it's a very UCB-centric view of how things stand, but I think there are lots of very broad issues that I'm sure travel not just across the UK, but across Europe, and there'll be lots of things that you'll see in our view, I'm sure, that will be very similar to your own experiences in your own institutions. So, first of all, what is University College? You've all been in, you've all seen what we do. I'm sure you've got a good understanding of the institution, but really just, if I can put it into context, we started life as an institution, as a technical college, back at the turn of the last century, training in catering and hospitality, owned by the local authority in Birmingham. So it's a very Birmingham-based institution. And over the 100 years or so, we've grown into, or grown through, different types of status. We've moved into the further education sector, and we were a further education corporation for a number of years, up until 2004. We transferred into the higher education sector. We became a higher education institution. And in 2012, December 2012, we became a university. So we've had quite a journey through a range of different sectors of education. So we're a new university. You don't get much newer. There were 11 convertees in December. The legislation changed in terms of what could be a university, what type of institution could be a university, and we, along with 10 other institutions, converted from a status called University College, although we kept the name University College, we changed the status from University College to university. So that's where we fit. We work within both sectors, and by a mixed economy provider, what I mean is that we have a mixture of further education still and higher education. That transfer that we've gone through, we haven't abandoned our further education work. We've kept it. We have about 35% of our student numbers, about 35% of our work is further education. So in the main, 16 to 19-year-olds. And the rest of it is now undergraduate and postgraduate work. So we've kept that focused mixed economy, which gives us advantages. It also gives us disadvantages in terms of change, because we're affected, as I'll go through, we're affected by changes to both sectors. And in the UK, at the moment, there are differences between higher education, further education, and schools. we are vocational education and training focused. All our programs lead to, yes, higher study, but a focus towards employment. We are a vocational institution, and that makes us quite different to lots of other providers, both in further and higher education, particularly in higher education. At FE level, we don't have any general education such as GCSE A levels, and at higher education, we don't have general degrees such as English, history, other social sciences. They're all vocational. And our focus is not research, we are teaching and learning intensive. The focus is very much on delivering to students and preparing them for work. Yes, our staff engage in research and scholarly activity, but we don't receive funding from the government, and we're not and have no intention to become a research-intensive university. So that really is where we are looking at the changes in the sector, both further and higher education. That's our starting point. At the moment, as I'm sure in all your own institutions and your own environments, we have two key factors that are affecting change. One is the political interest, and the other are the economic conditions. The political interest is around social mobility, it's about giving people opportunities, it's about getting votes, obviously. Economic conditions, there is no money. It's probably as simple as that. Perhaps not no money, but there's very little money. So we're in very difficult times. Put the two together, so you've got a big political interest in education generally and what it means for political parties, and you've got the education, you've got the economic conditions that we're all experiencing, and you get this sort of volatile mix, really, that leads to significant change. There is nothing that is standing still in schools, further education, higher education in the UK at the moment. There is constant change. There's always a certain amount of change, but because of these two coming together with such a focus, that has become very significant. Just to give you a view of the sector, you may know this, so excuse me if you've got these sort of figures, but really just again to give you some of the context of where we're working and what we're trying to achieve. In the UK at the moment, there are a lot more further education colleges, 16 plus, lower level skills, and then there are higher education institutions, and you can see the balance, 402 to 163. Not all the 163 are universities. There are still some private, there's a couple of private providers, and there are still some university colleges, and there are higher education institutions. So the classification is not all degrees. There's probably about 140, I think, universities. In terms of numbers, these are quite telling, I think, for the UK, and also come back to the political interest. A key thing that has driven political parties across all the different political parties in the UK is that the UK is not very good, and has not been very good, at getting people into further education, post-compulsory education. We have fallen behind OECD countries, and we haven't kept up with the skills competition. And you can see the latest figures. Number of students in further education, 4 million. Half that almost in higher education. Apprenticeships, where we do really badly compared to the rest of Europe and most of the world. Work-based employment, work-based education and training, only 520,000. And unfortunately, and very disappointingly, the line at the bottom, the NEET is not in, it's a term that we use, the acronym is not in education, employment or training. So over 1 million young people, older people, are out of work, not engaged in training. So we've got more people doing nothing than we have on apprenticeships in the UK. And we've got half as many people doing nothing almost than are in higher education. So it's not a particularly perfect state, and you can see why there is such, therefore, political interest in bringing about change and driving that change. To give you a bit of an idea, I've just listed, these aren't all of them, in the last however many years that goes back, probably 8 years or so at most. These are a range of government either legislation or policy documents, advice and guidance, changes to regulation. One came out the day before yesterday that I haven't put up on here, telling both further and higher education what it should be doing and saying what the government intend to do and where the government intend to channel money, really, because money is the biggest driver in terms of, from a government point of view, in instigating change. So you can see, if you're working in the sector, further and higher education, you've got this plethora of information coming towards you, and in terms of managing an institution, as well as managing the day-to-day operation from a strategic point of view, where you want to go, you've got to think about all these things that are coming in, hitting you left and right, further and higher education, about what the government wants to do, or the government of the day wants to do, and what the legislation requires. So we talk about, the government likes to say we're removing bureaucracy, we're removing central control, we're trying to free up further education, independence. There's an awful lot of advice for a very independent sector there. And some of it is not just advice, obviously. There's legislation in there as well. So, a challenge from that point of view. I just want to take you through, I know we're looking at higher education, but from a UCB point of view, we sit, as I say, between this further and higher education in terms of policy, in terms of managing our own change and leading. So, further education policy, just try to cut through all those documents and that information. And this is my interpretation of what are the key things that come out of all that. And it's those things on there, that there is a drive in further education for higher level skills. And that comes back to this political issue that the UK is falling behind the rest of the world in terms of developing its workforce and developing higher level skills. We have a very poor record, as I say, not just of participation, but of engagement and qualification. Something like 40% of the working population of Birmingham don't have qualifications above level 3. Compare that to other major cities in the world, we don't perform particularly well. So higher level skills. Apprenticeships are very much the flavour of the day to get young people in particular, and they are aimed at young people, into the workplace and developing the skills based in work, the skills that the government and others believe that employers want and that will get them jobs. From a college point of view, freeing colleges from central government control. There are measures in place that are removing restrictions in terms of, in the main, funding related, because the biggest control that central government has on colleges is the amount of money and the agencies that fund the money. So the more freedom there is in that, the more freedom the college has to do what it wants to do. However, that in itself is shifting, as I'll mention when we come to the LEPs. There's also, again, this political drive to professionalise teachers in further education. We've sort of played around with that in the UK. There isn't, if you're a teacher in a school, you have to have a certain qualification. If you're a teacher in a further education college, you don't. You can come into the further education college with industry experience, there isn't, well, you could come in with no qualification at all, in theory. There is no requirement. Institutions impose their own requirements. UCB, for example, it's a contractual condition rather, that staff have to have a qualification. But nationally, that isn't the case. And that's changing. In terms of how we treat our learners, up until, well, currently, still, up until the end of this academic year, any person, regardless of age, who didn't have a level 3 first qualification was entitled to free education up to level 3. So that's under sub-university level, regardless of age. From 2013, anybody who's over the age of 24 no longer has that. They have to no longer has that right to free education. They now have to take out a loan. So if you're 24 or over, unfortunately, you've got to pay your fees, draw down a loan that the government, in effect, underwrite. What impact that will have on participation for 24-year-olds plus, I'll leave you to consider. And finally on FE, local enterprise partnerships. There has been, over the last few years, a very central control of funding. There's very little planning. Well, shouldn't say there's very little planning centrally. There is planning centrally about what FE colleges should do, but there's been no firm directive to say from central government that colleges should run course X, course Y, and not run some of the others. The introduction of local enterprise partnerships is one of their roles is to sort of challenge that, to make sure that colleges and training providers work closely with local companies, local businesses, and local authorities, local communities, to make sure that the skills that are developed in that area meet the needs of the locality. What that's likely to mean is that we are likely to see a lot more, not central control, but local control in terms of what we should be offering in terms of our courses. So on one hand, we're freeing up colleges from central government. You could argue on the other, the way it's going, there'll be more local control. In terms of the institutions, it's a very competitive environment in the UK. There are lots of colleges and providers vying for a finite number of young people who want to come on their courses. So there is more supply than there is demand across the FE sector, and therefore there is competition. That leads to financial instability. Those institutions that recruit students, in the main, if they manage well, are financially stable. Those institutions who cannot recruit lose money year on year, and that's where the financial instability comes. That leads, and has led in the FE sector, to mergers, acquisitions, and collaboration. The picture there is a local college, Stourbridge College, and you can't read that, but Birmingham Metropolitan College. They are in consultation at the moment about a merger. And that is typical of the sector. In Birmingham last year, 2 colleges merged. We're seeing that up and down the country. The other thing that FE providers are doing in the UK is moving into higher education. Higher education is no longer the exclusive right of universities, and the government are pushing that diversity and pushing money and pushing places into further education. And the other thing that FE colleges are doing is diversifying into all sorts of different things, work-based learning, getting very much closer to employers, working in private-public partnerships. Higher education, in comparison, how is that environment changing? Well, again, this is my take on the ideology of the current view of higher education, and that is that the current government believe that students equal customers, therefore that leads to competition, and that competition drives up quality, drives up efficiency, creates the diversity, which leads to this goal of social mobility, to come back to the political drive. So it seems whether it works or not, I don't know, but that is the sort of ideology of what's driving the policy of higher education. You'll all know that we changed in the UK the funding arrangements, and now students, up until last year, the fees to go to a university, whether it's Oxford, whether it's UCB, were capped at £3,500. From last year, that changed, and they're now capped at £9,000. So institutions can change that. That puts the student much more customer focused, because they are now paying £9,000 for their studies and want a return on that investment and want value for money. The environment in higher education has strong similarities to that in FE in many respects. In others, it's different. But There is competition. There are now 5 universities in Birmingham. Whether there will be 5 universities in Birmingham in 10 years' time, I don't know. The government, again, are also deregulating to a certain extent to encourage private providers. Up until now, there haven't been. There's one private university, and there are private providers of higher education, but very limited in the UK. The trend is to encourage competition and encourage the entrance of private providers. There are some fundamental barriers to private providers. One is that there is a cap on the number of students that institutions can take, which obviously puts a lot of providers off. You can imagine a shop opening up as a private enterprise and saying, right, okay, you can have only 10 tins of whatever because we're capped on it. I mean, it's not going to work until that cap is lifted, which it probably will in the not too distant future. There is a trend for much greater diversity in higher education sector. 20 years ago, higher education sector was university. And if you went into higher education, you went to university. You didn't go to an FE college, that wasn't a university, that wasn't higher education, you didn't go into any other area. Now that's changing. There are a whole range of different ways of going into higher education that are not university. FE colleges, university colleges, apprenticeships, work-based. There are a number of companies who work with universities so that students attend on a very limited basis a university. Most of the study is done in the workplace. So there's a whole range of ways of getting into higher education now that didn't exist before. Unfortunately, because of the economic times, because of the competition, there is still some financial instability. The sector in itself is very stable, HEFGE and all the reports would suggest. But when you look at individual institutions, the story starts to wobble a little bit. There is threat to certain institutions. UCB, I'm hasten to add, very sound financially, touch wood. London Metropolitan University, I'm sure you may have heard of London Metropolitan University. I'll come back to the sort of numbers that they lost because of some issues around UK border agency and some other issues. They are struggling. Mergers and acquisitions, collaboration and innovation, very much the same as FE. We are seeing more partnership and we are seeing things changing. The little bit at the bottom that you can't see, university launches bold new initiative to attract brightest students. We've had, traditionally, to go into a Russell Group university, a very strict A-level, almost exclusive A-level entrance. University of Birmingham this year has sort of introduced this pilot where they are offering places to students who haven't yet got their A-levels because they're saying we're taking them on the value of what we think they're going to bring to us. Now, if that's taken across the sector, that will change greatly the way we recruit and the way students come into higher education. But it is a sign of the times, and the sign of the times of how institutions are having to change to keep up and to keep that competitive advantage. Speed of change. These are just a couple of snippets out of the press. You can see about this time last year, there was a prediction most universities to have fewer places. Remember, this is following the introduction of higher fees. So, yes, we were expecting that. And you can see, second paragraph there, some by more than 10%. Wow. And we've got all the universities thinking, oh, if we lose 10%, we lose 10% year on year, that's going to be devastating. If we just look at what the impact was a year later, and I think that's 24th of January 2013, and you look at the bottom line, London Metropolitan was down 43%, and University of Bolton 25%. So that scaremongering that universities could be losing 10% of their students in 1 year sort of jumped to this massive, in some instances, of 43%. Now, can you imagine a university losing 43% of its intake? How many years could it support that? What we have therefore seen in the sector are redundancies, academics being made redundant, support staff made redundant. Not in all institutions. There are winners and losers. In any competition, there's going to be winners and losers, and we're seeing that. Context of vocational education. I said that UCB is very vocational, and that is what we're about. We're seeing quite significant changes in how vocational education training is viewed in the United Kingdom. For a long time, vocational education has been seen as second chance, and in many instances, second best to academic. That the brighter individuals went to university and studied for degrees, and they were not vocational degrees. That's changing. That's changing as a country and as a society. We begin to realise slowly the value of vocational education in terms of driving economic growth and driving social mobility. We have gone through a period of a situation where planning was the norm, that we would have strategic plans for 5 years, 10 years, what's going to happen, we know what's going to happen within industries, we've got an idea, we plan for it. That's turned on its head almost. And yes, institutions still have strategic plans, but in terms of planning where the workforce is going to be and where the skills are going to be, that's changed very much from planning to innovation. It's not quite ad hoc, but it is about institutions being more innovative, working much more closely with employers, working much more closely with communities to identify where those needs are and delivering them, rather than we're going to plan for the next 5 years, and these are the courses, these are the programs we're going to be offering, and you can come and join them if you wish. That's what takes place, but it is moving much towards what sort of training do you want? What sort of education do you need? To employers, what sort of training do your workforce need? How can we as institutions, both further and higher education institutions, assist in that and be partners to it? So much more towards collaboration and innovation. As I've said, we're seeing a move from lower level skills to higher education and higher level skills. This move from vocational education where it was at sub-degree level, because once you go above that, it's not really vocational anymore, it becomes academic. That's changing. And we are seeing opportunities now moving at pace for vocational education to move into higher education. It's not doing so without meeting resistance, as I'll show you in a moment, but it's happening. And the FE sector, which was traditionally the vocational route, if you wanted to go into vocational education and training, an FE college, an FE sector was the way. That is changing to what I've labelled a vocational ecosystem. And really, that is just bringing together all of these areas and looking at it from a holistic viewpoint. That vocational education, like any other education, is about preparing people for life as well as work. And that starts in school, it goes through our current further education system, higher education system, and work. And those four components need to work together. They can't work in isolation. And for too many years in the UK, that's what's happened. That students have left school without the skills to progress to the next level, or they've left further education without the skills to do a job properly or to go into higher education, or they've left university without the skills. Until these come together, then it's not going to work effectively. And we are moving towards that. We're seeing vocational education go into schools. The curriculum's changing from 14-year-olds onwards. You may have noticed yesterday or the day before, Minister of Education introducing a technical baccalaureate based in schools, giving students an opportunity from 14 to transfer into vocational education. So things are changing very much. But it's not, as I say, without resistance. This is just a focus on vocational education. And I entitled this, The UK's Struggle with Vocational Education. I've taken snippets from the press going back 2003, 2001. Just pick a few out. 2001, will the British ever value vocational education as highly as purely academic? We're still having that debate. 2010, Royal Society of Chemistry, drop the Mickey Mouse degrees. Mickey Mouse degrees is a reference to some vocational degrees. And most recently, the picture there, I think we've got no, 2011, 2012, are vocational qualifications valuable? We're still constantly asking the question about where we are. We are not a country at ease with vocational education yet. We still have this fear that it undermines, in some quarters, that it undermines the value of education, that it's not as good. But it is changing. Where do we fit in that? Where does UCB fit in that? Well, in terms of our strategy, in terms of UCB managing change in that environment, we have a very clear strategy about where we want to go. We are comfortable with being vocational. We are comfortable with being teaching and learning focused and not research intense. We are not aspiring to be the University of Birmingham. We have a place within the higher education sector, and that is a key driver for our strategy. And as a result of that, our strategy is to keep that teaching and learning focus, but to grow, and to grow in that vocational ecosystem, really. We are not only involved now in further and higher education, but we're also getting involved with schools. We have a number of partnership arrangements with schools that link the vocational training that we specialise through schools, further and higher education, and obviously strong links with industry. We are, however, diversifying. We have, as an institution, like many institutions, been too reliant on one or two particular mode of delivery because it's been successful. And we're very conscious, as with others, that that is not sustainable, that we have to move. And so we're looking at and are implementing a whole range of different types of modes of delivery, working again with employers, working with work-based providers, online, a whole range of different activities. A key part of the strategy is that maintaining and enhancing quality. The competition is there. As an institution, whether we're in the FE sector, the HE sector, doesn't really matter. Unless we've got something that is strong in a competitive market, and that strength has got to be around providing a quality product and providing it consistently, as with any other activity. Unless we do that, we will fall foul to the competition that's out there at the moment. Students will choose to go somewhere else. If we don't provide the level of teaching and learning, if we don't provide them with the employability opportunities that they want, they will go somewhere else. And that is something in terms of the institution that we are very conscious to get that message to all of the staff, to all of the people in the institution, that that is where we're going and that is what we need to do. And to that end, in terms of our own sort of management of change, we have been holding a number of different sessions with staff talking about where we see the further and higher education sector, where we see UCB fitting in that and where we see it going in the future. So there's been a lot of talk and a lot of drivers for change within the institution. The worst case would be that everybody just shuts their eyes to what's going on around them and they wake up one morning and there's a big problem. And we're seeing institutions that are doing that. And finally, before Richard comes up for the next bit, collaboration with independents. As a strategy, UCB is very keen to collaborate, is very keen to work with a whole range of different partners, but it's also very keen to maintain its independence. We are not going to be willing, I was going to use the word victims, of acquisitions and mergers. We want to maintain our independence. We want to grow our status in terms of the contribution we make to the further and higher education sector. And that is based around us being strong, clearly focused, and being independent. But that doesn't exclude collaboration, and it will not exclude collaboration. You're probably aware that we have a very strong link with the University of Birmingham. We are not the University of Birmingham. We are independent from the university, but we have very strong links with them. And that will continue. And that's true with a lot of the other partnerships that we have. Do you want me to pause there before we go on to the next bit of, as I say, it's a bit of a dual act with Richard and I, but the purpose of that, as I said at the start, really was to give you a practitioner's view, a view from UCB of how we see the environment in which we work and how we see, or how we manage change within that environment, or how we go about managing change in that environment. I'm not saying what I've put up there is right or wrong. It's a view. Obviously, there are some facts and figures but you know, it is an independent view. But I'm happy to take any questions around that, or sort of anything further that you'd like to sort of dig a little bit deeper into.
We've got Gary for about another 20 minutes, but I'm here all day, so probably a good. Let's take the chance with Gary. To quiz him on any things he said there about leadership change.
Yeah.
We would definitely be interested in the process. I mean, these are so nice to hear, but you know, we're here to get some information about the details of the process. But I think this will not be possible today. So in due course, if you could just help us with what did you do? What kind of offices? What kind of procedures? Regulations and strategy,
Yeah, I think you're right. That it is quite a big topic in itself. But I could probably give you some pointers in terms of what we've done over the last few years in terms of adapting to this. We've looked at our internal structure, the structure of the academic schools. We've looked at and made changes. We've looked at the curriculum offer that we have for further and higher education. Is it sustainable? Is it drawing in the right number of students? Have we got the right programs? There's been a lot of inward-facing analysis of what we're doing and have we got our product right, as well as looking out to see what's happening in the environment. Have we got our own house in order? And as I said, that has been that change process has, as much as possible, involved everybody within the institution. And the strategy is to keep that message and keep that discussion within the institution, that we don't, it's not a top-down directive. It is people coming up with ideas, people understanding within the institution that this change is happening and the speed of the change. And that really is key to how we're managing that change process, to get that message across so people know. Because we believe the worst thing is that if you haven't got everybody on board, then you're not going to change. And the changing culture, whether we have a culture change, I'm not sure whether our culture is changing per se, but individuals within the organisation's awareness of the need for change has been heightened, and we will continue to do that.
Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you very much. Do you want to?
Yes. What I might do, just based on that question, there's a couple of slides I was going to do, but as I say, I'm here all day, so you're stuck with me. So this afternoon I can cover some of this as well. And you will get all these slides, by the way, electronically, so we can send you these afterwards, so don't feel the need to necessarily write all this down. And I was going to cover some of these reports, but we can cover these this afternoon. But based on that question, so you win, sir, as you asked the question, I'm just going to give you an example of a process model I've used in my previous existence and I now use at UCB to address some of these change issues. Okay? I'm working in a business school, of course. We give it a nice name, so it's called Pave the Way. It's an English expression. Where PAVE stands for Portfolio, Added Value and Expectations. Okay. And just briefly, again, we can touch on again this afternoon, but to touch on where this came from looking at a range of people, middle managers like myself, who were managing in this change environment. And this is what we found. What we found was the first thing that went wrong was their portfolio drifted. It became unclear in all this change where their responsibility started and ended. There was lots of new initiatives. There was lots of change. There was lots of new partners, new collaborations. So as a result, people's portfolio, the things they thought they were responsible for, grew. Okay? But didn't always grow strategically. Okay? So we found the first thing was to clarify what are you responsible for? Where's the focus? Okay? So people lost focus in change, which is quite common. The next thing that happened was people became busy. Okay? Things change. You take more work on. People get stressed. Everyone gets busier. So we found we had to work with service managers and middle managers on, well, where's your added value? Because the things you were doing 10 years ago which added value to your organisation maybe don't add value anymore. You know? Because people's expectations have changed. So the students' expectations of the service they get has changed. So you need to think about where are you really adding value? And what should you be doing given your new portfolio? Okay? So this is one model, again, as I say, we can touch on this afternoon, but we've used quite extensively to clarify with middle managers and leaders of organisations how they manage through change and how they avoid just becoming busy fools with just so much change and so many initiatives that the focus gets lost and they're everything to everybody. Okay? And that's one of the strengths, hopefully, which came across from Gary's talk of UCB. We're very focused. We know what we're good at. As Gary said, we're not trying to be Birmingham University or Oxford. We have certain disciplines, we have certain programs, we have a vocational focus, and that focus, it gives you strength in a time of change. This part of this research I did many years back with people like Simon, who will speak to you later, was looking at lots of universities in the UK and their work with business engagement. And we found that their portfolios slipped. We found they weren't always clear what they were responsible for. Initiatives would be bolted on. There'd be additional things. And quite quickly it became unstrategic and unfocused. Okay. And the model works like that. These things are all connected. So you start with clarifying your portfolio, identify how you add value to that portfolio, and manage expectations, which is the biggest challenge I think we've all got going forward. Because the expectations of young people coming into higher education, the expectation of government, the expectation of business is all growing. Surprise, surprise, we're having cuts and everyone's expectations are getting higher. We have less resource, but everyone expects more. And that's a real challenge, of course. Yeah? Okay. You want it the other way around, really. Okay. Okay. Just quickly again, as you touched on, what's the process? And it's a bit obvious, but sometimes it's worth stating the obvious. We found it was the 4 C's. On one level, it's just cooperation. Sometimes you just need to cooperate with some other people. You just need to cooperate with a business partner on developing a curriculum. And it could be as light touch as that. In the way what we're cooperating today, yeah? It's just consulting other people. Just let's cooperate on this agenda. Because the other stakeholders can help you. Okay? So we found universities were a bit insular in the UK 15 years ago, maybe. They didn't need all these stakeholder partners. Well, increasingly, we cooperate. Sometimes you have to just coordinate, which is like the next level up. And, of course, the ultimate goal is to genuinely collaborate, which is a bit like European projects do, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, where you're genuinely collaborating on developing something new. But communication is the goal. Okay? We found that when we looked at leadership and change and we looked at the challenges managers faced, the single biggest issue was bad communication. It was lack of clarity about who was saying what was meant by these phrases. I mean, Gary quite rightly projected up there some of the myriad of reports that have come out of government, stakeholders. Now, we're all probably saying the same thing, but it doesn't feel like it because the communication is different. People use different language in industry, the private sector. Ministers use different language, political language. Students see it completely differently. They're talking in shorthand, Twitter, and so on. So people's communication, they weren't always saying, they didn't realise they were saying the same thing. Okay? And if you get bad communication, you get problems. Okay? And that's when we found the portfolio was wrong, because the communication had been misunderstood. So somebody thought they're responsible for something, and that was a priority, and it wasn't. The game had changed. Okay? And you talk about an industry, really, in higher education, which for 100 years didn't change a lot. There's probably more change in the last 3 years, 5 years, than the previous 50 years. Okay? So there is a culture of stability. There has been. If you take Oxford and Cambridge, a culture of stability for 800 years. Okay? So the last few years are pretty dynamic in comparison. Okay? So we can touch back on this model. We can tell you how we use it in more detail and the process, if you like, later. Okay? But it does raise some questions. The sort of questions you get is it clear what your team's portfolio is? As a manager, as a leader, are your staff clear about what they're responsible for and where the focus is and where the goals are now, rather than 6 months ago or 2 years ago? Because that's quite dynamic. Are they clear, and this is just a service culture, but are they clear where they're value adding? Because people have to feel they value add, especially in a service culture. You know, if you're a central support unit in a university or any organisation, are you providing a value add service? Or you do what you've always done because that's what you do? Do people really value it? You know, does it need to change? Okay. Because there's a lot of stakeholders now. There's a lot more stakeholders. And that's a real challenge in the HE sector we're finding. There's lots of people who've got a view of how this should work. Whereas we're pretty independent and autonomous organisations for 100, 800 years. Now there's government, there's business, there's young people who are customers, not students maybe. So there's lots of stakeholders who feel they've got a say on how it should be run. And we have to listen to them all, increasingly. Okay. The other thing about that model is it's based on a performance model. So if we go back, the idea is that you go round this model and based on the outcome of your expectations, you change your portfolio. So if your performance is bad in one area and the expectation wasn't met or is exceeded, you change your portfolio. And you go round this model several times and it reiterates, and it's about continuous improvement, which is actually the only game in town, isn't it? The whole world's about continuous improvement. There's no silver bullet. There's no immediate solution to this. It's all about continuous improvement. Okay. So based on your performance on something, are you changing what you do? And we found a lot of organisations didn't. They measured their performance in change, but that, when we looked to say, how did that change your behaviour then? How did that change what you did the following year? It wasn't always clear. Okay? They understood where they'd underperformed and where they'd overperformed, but unlike the private sector maybe, where that's more harsh, if you've got an underperformance, you're losing money, we found the universities weren't as strong at recognising that performance needs to affect what you do the following year. Yeah? Because of the public systems and the university process, which is, say, 100 years old. And one issue, and it may be a UK, particularly in the UK, but I think it's probably Europe-wide, is we suffered from something called initiative-itis, which is a made-up word, but is the idea that there's a lot of initiatives. So you get new politicians come along, some new stakeholders, and they start some new initiative. We're calling it this now, and this is what the money's for. What we found was these initiatives are not sustainable. Okay? They had no sustainability. Initiatives come and go, almost by design. While the funding's there, and Europe's guilty of this with some European funding models, while the funding's there, these things are flavour of the month and happen, but they're initiatives, so they don't get integrated and they don't get sustained. And that's a real problem, because you redirect your resource and your efforts to an initiative, and if that initiative doesn't get sustained, you're just chasing the next initiative, you're redirecting a lot of intelligence and a lot of people power and human capital into very episodic, very short-term goals. And that's not good business. Yeah? Okay? So increasingly we're looking for things which are sustainable models, which are integrated into the core business, not a nice-to-have external one-off initiative. Okay? And we found that was a big factor in redirecting people's efforts away from their core business. And hence they were lacking focus, because they were focused on all these initiatives which came and went, depending on changes of government, changes of funding. But they weren't sustainable often. Okay? Right. At that point, I'll shut up. Okay. So note that, we'll come back to that this afternoon, some of that. Your point about process. So as if we rehearsed it. There you go. Well done. And we'll talk more about that later today. John, can we move? We're going to move to John Ryder's talk now from the IOD.